Thanks, Sunny, for getting together today. I appreciate this opportunity to finally get to see you face to face. I know we've had several conversations on the phone and otherwise and have kind of communicated because I think we see some of the challenges in the aquaculture industry pretty similarly, just from different angles, of course. Maybe to kick things off, maybe we should give a really brief introduction about ourselves, and then we'll just kind of see how the discussion goes. I know most of our discussions have been about feed, water quality, and disinfection, so I'm sure we'll touch on different elements of that. And then, yeah, like we've discussed, perhaps do it another time if it turns out we can bring some value to people. So how about you give me a brief introduction about yourself for those that don't know you?
Yeah, Brian, thank you for this opportunity and organizing this thing. I think your passion is really something which is infectious, and you have this cross-sectional and multi-disciplinary way of thinking, which is really intriguing. And I'm really happy you came up with this idea that maybe we should discuss these things so that the greater audience can get benefit from this area. So a little bit about me. I'm an aquaculture expert with background in fish feed, but basically I have worked with the whole value chain. So when it comes to land-based fish farming, the fish farming in general, so I've worked with different species. But my core expertise is fish nutrition, but I learned the other things by doing it. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, okay. And for those that don't know me, I'm Brian Grachowski. I've got about 20 years experience in food and water microbiology is my background. Specific to aquaculture, I would say that I do tend to have more of a narrow knowledge focus, which is involved in the disinfection side of things. I would say I have a high level of knowledge on the UV side of disinfection. But Sunny, as you mentioned, all of this kind of goes together. So, I think each of us have to broaden our scope a little bit because water quality is going to affect how well disinfection might work, and feed, of course, can affect water quality. And so you really have to have a bit of a broader mindset to really be able to solve each one of these different points and optimize the different points in the process. So,
yeah, I quite agree. And we need a lot of people thinking in the same way, so that we all come together and try to fix the problems of aquaculture, because this is one of the most sustainable way of producing food.
Yeah.
So I think this is what we agree about.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, speaking again from my side of the fence on UV, I think a lot of us as UV manufacturers, we tend to sit in a bubble, to be honest. We look at our own device and what it's capable of. And when we size or specify a system for a particular job or performance level, we might set minimum standards on what the system requires coming in order to kind of protect ourselves, so to speak. But I think we tend to do a poor job of looking at the overall process and making some recommendations and just trying to have some understanding of what those challenges might be, so that can be better explained. We've seen a lot of specifications come through for bids on some of these aquaculture projects. And I think people tend to just make assumptions that, okay, this is the way it is. This is the water quality all the time. There's no variability. There's no other questions to ask. And that's a recipe for disaster, unfortunately. So
yeah, exactly. And we have to have very broader sense of looking at the things rather than just checking few parameters and thinking that everything will go up and down.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it'll take a lot of teamwork. Yeah, for sure. But one thing I wanted to ask you about, to maybe put you on the spot from the get-go, as I saw recently, you talked a little bit about this local 5 concept when it comes to land-based aquaculture, which I thought was interesting. And I was wondering if you wouldn't mind expanding on that or explaining that concept a little bit further to people, and then you and I can dig into why does it make sense? What are the challenges with the existing mindset where something like this could be a potential fit in certain areas? So explain that a little further.
Thank you for asking. To be very honest, I was a little bit shy to put these thoughts up because These are maybe not that politically correct, you know.
Sure.
We, of course, on one side of the things, we have this concept going on about the biocircular economy. Many people are talking about it. And on the other hand, we have, of course, these big land-based fish farming projects where people expect a lot should be coming out of them.
Yeah.
So, and I think we don't want to have a bad image for aquaculture after 5 to 10 years if there is a big mortality happen in some of these big projects, and investors, they lose interest in investing in aquaculture, and the future could be quite grim. So therefore, I do whatever I can do, and then I figured this thing out that why not pitch this thing up? Maybe people will start talking about it, or maybe it's not possible to come up with everything locally, but at least there could be a certain success on that side and get people to talk about it. So.
Right.
So a little bit about this 5 local concept, or the local concept is that you have local fish species, which is suitable for local water quality environment. And then while you're feeding that fish, you should be considering to have as much as possible to use the local fish feed ingredients. So that you have less impact on the environment at the same time. But how to make people eat that fish, then you have to also understand the local market. Maybe some species which might work, some species which might not work. It could be marine species, it could be freshwater species. So you have to think a lot more locally. And of course, when it comes to the laws and regulations in your local region, in maybe the laws in the US are different than laws in Europe. So, for example, so you have to think on all these aspects. And I understand there is a big problem with certain species. For example, how you make them eat certain species, but of course, if you work a little bit more on the branding side of the things and get people to eat that local fish, at the same way you have taught people over the several years that this fish is more healthy than this fish, or maybe this type of seafood is more healthy than this type of seafood. So let's get people, let them eat more seafood, and it shouldn't matter which species. So we should maybe change a little bit about our mindset around the species, and maybe we should be giving chance to many other species which are more suitable to the local conditions. This is the core, I would like to say.
Yeah, and that's a real challenge. You know, I know there's a lot of movement now, of course, in land-based salmon because it's a large market, large volume market. It's a fish that people are familiar with and eat on a regular basis. But I will say here in Charleston, South Carolina, for example, when there has been more of a push in the last 5 to 10 years in particular about sustainable seafood here, you know, we start to see fish on the menu that we wouldn't normally see 10 or 15 years ago. You know, fish that used to be viewed as trash fish or garbage, you know, that people just frankly would not eat. Now, I'm not suggesting that we're going to start growing triggerfish here locally in Charleston, but you know, we start to see things like triggerfish on the menus more often, where you would never see that probably 15 years ago or more. But chefs have taken the time to find ways to prepare it in a way that's appetizing, that's interesting, it's local, it's sustainable, and it makes a lot of sense to be able to do that. You know, to replicate that, you know, across the country, I'm sure is quite challenging. But I think as people learn what to do with some of these other fish species that maybe are less common, maybe some of it is just an issue of being less available, I think in some cases. So perhaps, as you mentioned, the local 5 concept, having fish that are more common to an area and be more readily available at the supermarket when people go to buy it, maybe that's one thing in itself that would really help. Where I think right now,
and this is not easy. I didn't say it's easy. You have to change pupil mindset, and this takes time, and this takes a lot of energy. But on the other hand, if you can diversify also. For example, you can have salmon, but at the same time, you can have multiple other species. So you can, of course, build a concept around it, so that like people get the importance is that people have to eat more seafood, and that seafood which is coming from aquaculture, which is more sustainable, people have to know this thing, that this is something, it's healthy for us and we have to eat it. And what, in whatever way we have to get people to eat this. So otherwise they will just eat the food which is not really healthy for them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good point. What do you see when you think about this local 5 concept as compared to a lot of the movement that's going now with land-based aquaculture that seems to be mostly around salmon? At least that's where the big investments tend to be. Why else would you diversify into other species? If you were an investor, why get into some of these other species, for example, instead of focusing on where there's high level of competition right now, but there's for sure high risk, high reward, I'm sure, in the salmon market. But do you think there's a missed opportunity there to dig into some of these other species like this?
Well, we don't know for sure, but of course this is the area worth exploring. And my point is, I want to start this debate, of course, and there should be more people looking into this thing, because if you really see some of the fish species, which could be like trout, for instance. So sure. Trout is one of the fish species which has been ignored for a while, and it's also very compared to salmon, it grows a bit faster, and it's also red color or pink fish. And you can have the marine phospholipids like also omega-3s. If you want to supply that to people, that could be coming in. So people should diversify, maybe start with trout a little bit. And there are some people doing, for example, yellow, this kingfish, for example. Not yellow, I think. Yeah, this kingfish. So there are people who are actually exploring these opportunities, and I think it is worth exploring rather than just to stick to salmon. After 5 years, have a lot of bad reputation, which can end up actually giving the bad reputation to offshore aquaculture also, to cage aquaculture, and of course pond is a little bit away, but still in the end consumer mindset, this doesn't really matter. For them, what matters, this is good, this is not good. So yeah, they're really polarized. The end consumer is really polarized, and we have to have a good image of the industry. So one of the examples you might have seen on my article, I quote that unfortunately, if you see a bad video about the fish farming, you have like 5 million views about that, or 6 million views about that. And if there is somebody talking about sustainability, oh, that's like 100,000 or few thousand. So this is really a big gap. Yeah. And we have to cover that actually, and we have to come up with a good example. And one of the important thing is about the inclusion of more people into fish farming. For example, if you have local species, if you have the smaller projects, then multiple entrepreneurs can rise and grow their own food in the local areas, so that more and more people get to eat seafood. But unfortunately, if we just leave this to the hands of few people and the projects don't go on, then we have a big problem. So this is something I want to pay, people should pay attention to this thing.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how consumers view some of these farm salmon projects in particular. And I agree. I think a lot of it depends on what makes the news. You know, if the projects go as planned and as smoothly as planned, which would be probably unrealistic, but ideal, then perhaps there won't be any issues, any significant issues to deter consumers. But sure, you know, there's some issues related to wastewater discharge from those facilities or others that could create some challenges or some negative press in some of those cases, which could certainly be challenging. Yeah, I know there's been some companies, you know, talking about things of genetically modified species and some other things to make them disease resistant. And while that's good from a profit and production standpoint, I'm sure, to be able to keep those species from having a high mortality rate, I question how well will consumers adopt that, perhaps, you know. There obviously is some negative press on that side as well. And it's a difficult balance. It's an interesting market. It's an interesting time to see how it develops, and certainly a lot of opportunity for the people that get it right, so to speak. So, yeah. So on the feed side, I mean, let me just ask again, because how feed ties into, quality and so many other things related to the fish itself and other things. I wonder if you could expand a little bit about the feeding process and how automated or manual feeding typically is in a lot of these RAS designs, so people can understand if there's opportunities to optimize from that side of things.
Yeah, yeah, that is a very nice question. So, yeah, there is a lot of things going on the automation side for the feed. And actually, there are companies who are coming up with the softwares for have the right amount of feed being fed in the tanks, and there are some companies who are also working on coming with AI, for example. So they are coming up with the AI technology together for this feed being offered to the fish in the right way, and then they can estimate also the biomass in the cage or tank, for example, so that you know what's inside, so that you can calculate in a right matter. But unfortunately, one of the issue related to the feed is the pupil issue. That is like people tend to feed more. And if you see lots of mortality which happens normally, or which is maybe not reported, you can say. So it's a feed plays a very big role. The moment you feed the fish more than what it really need, you end up actually destroying the water quality, and the fish is not really eating. There is a H2S coming into the water. A lot of more nitrogen is present there in the water. So it's also destroying the biofilter, and then your mechanical filter is going out of the order. Yeah. So it's a series of problems you invite the moment you actually overfeed the fish. So in fact, there is a person, I don't know the name, but there is somebody wrote a PhD thesis on this thing. Are you feeding the fish or are you feeding the pond? So this is really an issue of aquaculture when it comes to the human problem. And politically correct way of maybe saying it, human resource problem. So as you said probably once. Yeah. So I think this is really, we need to work with people. We need to motivate people that why they are in aquaculture at the first place. There are so many other things in the world. So why are you in aquaculture at the first place? So of course you have to have some meaning in what you are doing. And aquaculture is type of area where you, or generally the food production, people have a lot of meaning and pride and feelings attached to that. So we need to have more people coming into the industry where they see the meaning, they know that they think in a way that it's very important to do the things in the right way so that the fish don't die. It's not a video game where the fish will just die, everything will just go away. So you have to kind of think in a certain way. And I think we have a lot of need in aquaculture industry right now for this type of thinking, that why are you doing it? What's your why? Are you here to kind of take care of the fish in the right way, or are you just going to do your job and just go away? So this is really important going forward, because aquaculture, of course, there are so many estimates, people talking about like millions of tons of fish is coming in next 5 years or in 10 years. So the more fish we are going to have, the more problems we might have, and more bad press, of course, and more bad negative image of the industry overall. And one of the problems to solve this thing is to have people with right mindset coming into it.
Yeah, and that's tough. I think we can probably spend a whole nother session talking about, the quote unquote human capital aspect of these operations, right? Because this is, again, the same challenge that you see in aquaculture is the same as we see also in a lot of the rest of the food industry. So if you look at some of the documentation that the FDA has released recently about Blueprint for the Future, I think they recently produced, which was about a handful or so of concept. One of them, again, was talking about creating a food safety culture. Again, this kind of culture, this mindset And man, what a challenge that is to have that sort of influence. I mean, changing culture within a company is difficult anyway, but to change it all the way down across the board is quite an incredible challenge. Hey, it's easy to do it at the executive table, you know, to
It's
change a
easy to
culture.
talk. It's easy to talk. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, to do it all the way through the chain where it matters at a lot of those levels just as well, because at any level, if somebody doesn't play their role and do their job the way they should, the downstream effect is huge. But I think we could probably spend an hour talking about that element.
Yeah, maybe for next time, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and probably still not come up with any reasonable solution, but again, just a discussion to understand some of those aspects.
At least more people can get to talk about it, and at least they can, then we might have some more people, like-minded people talking the same thing, and that might change something.
Yeah, I would obviously, that aspect of things would be a huge boost to the industry if there's no magic cure, but to identify some of those elements would be great. But let me take a step back. You know, I know we already only have about 5 or so minutes left on what we plan to do for the cutoff for this. But let me take a step back when you talk about the feeding aspect, because we immediately started getting into the human capital side, the people involved. So from your perspective and from your experience, when it comes to the feeding, again, it tends to be mostly a manual process. And although technology is available for automation and maybe perhaps predictive analytics as well, most facilities still have not evolved in that direction. Is that true?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So of course it takes some resources to apply those technologies on your facilities. So for example, in aquaculture, in pond aquaculture, is a big portion still is like manual feeding. So it's a big challenge, of course, and these things will take time. And one of the problem with the new technologies when they have to come into the aquaculture is the fragmentation of the industry, where you cannot really kind of, the way we are just talking, it would have been nice maybe if it's only just one company, but we have so big industry and so much diversity in this and so many players that you cannot fix the things overnight. But at least you can come up with the good examples, and once you have like few good examples, others might follow. That could be the way to go.
Yeah. So let me ask this, if it's mostly a manual process for the most part, you know, when somebody comes in the morning to feed the fish, is it primarily just fed based on a certain amount per day schedule, and that doesn't deviate until what's the trigger to change whatever that feeding schedule or feeding amount is? Is it typically based on data?
When it comes to the manual, right?
Yeah,
you're talking about
exactly.
Yeah, for the manual, of course, if somebody is having a small farm and then you are doing it manually, basically. So in this case, you have to be more observant, of course. So you have to be really sure that what type or how much amount you have been feeding in the tanks, for example, or in the pond. The pupil should be able to follow that up if fish has eaten or not. So sometimes what happens is that if you're feeding in the morning and evening, and you keep on doing it next day, you don't understand. Might be pupil, the fish has eaten the feed in the morning, but they might not eat the feed in the evening. So you have to actually adjust your feeding on day-to-day basis, thinking about this thing. But of course, this is really like, as you also, not just you, but many other people think about this. Maybe it's just the sixth sense they follow, right? but sometimes they do the sixth sense right, but sometimes it goes wrong. And when it goes wrong, maybe you have a bad mood, maybe you're not happy, so you end up putting all the feedback into the pond and destroying everything. So there are things like that, and there are cases like that. And unfortunately, if you really talk about the ground level aquaculture, the ground zero, the little production, in the little production, you don't have like in many parts of the world, the people who are working at the ground level, they are not maybe happy with their job because maybe they are not well paid, or maybe they have like working on the ground zero at aquaculture is not the first priority for anybody. who is educated, unfortunately. And I think this has to change a little bit. Fortunately, this thing is changing actually when it comes to the RAS operations because of the investments coming in. So there are like people with more education which are actually being employed there. But of course, if this has to happen on the pond aquaculture or the smaller scale aquaculture facilities, this will take some time. But of course, it's always possible to motivate people. It's always possible to kind of fix their mindset and work with the mindset a little bit so that they realize the importance of their job.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, and in the interest of time, I mean, I think it would be good for us to talk next time as well about, you know, you tend to probably overfeed than underfeed if you're looking purely at doing it from a visual aspect of things, right? And then the impact of that is even more significant. But maybe we should touch on that next time. But, you know, maybe to bring it full circle, I mean, look, let's go back to this local 5 concept that you talked about before. You know, if you have this human capital issue, particularly, you know, even at these smaller facilities right now, and you said, you know, most people don't want to be there at that bottom level, so to speak. Well, you know, maybe you do if it is more of a local community, sustainable mindset side of things. Maybe you do feel more invested in similar ways, purely culture-wise, as people do, for example, with the craft beer industry, for example, here in the States and other places in the globe as well. But you see, people really are devoted to that business, that company. They take a little bit of pride in whatever role they might play within that company. How you would change that overnight would be challenging. But again, I think that could be a difference if there was a little bit more pride in what you were doing for the community. Again, local species, keeping things close and local. People do tend to have more of an attachment to that. So that may be, again, one benefit that's kind of hidden behind the scenes in your concept, for sure. You know?
Yeah, of course, when you have like more things are more locally oriented, so then you have more local jobs, and then you have local entrepreneurship and local services. So this is, of course, it's one of the thing we should also pay attention to, what it is bringing to the local communities.
Yeah. And I think the tendency as well is people have a natural tendency, I think, to want to support local businesses, places that seem to be invested locally. I mean, we think about that here and where we decide to go to dinner. There's a lot of places that serve really good Italian food, a lot of places that serve really good seafood. But we tend to go to the place that we know started here in Charleston with local chefs and local people. And, you know, there's a reason why we go where we go, right? It's similar to a lot of people.
Yeah, and of course, one of the interesting thing, which is, or one of the important thing which we should pay attention to is the branding part of the thing. So if you educate the customer, if you can educate the customer to eat the meatless meat, for example, so you can always educate the customer to eat more seafood, for example, and the local seafood produced locally, for example, just as an example. Or of course, like people should have to have more attention on this aspect, that we need to create more demand for people to eat more seafood. It's also good for, of course, their health, but it's also good for our industry.
Yeah,
because,
right, I agree.
Because one of the important things maybe one of the things I wanted to say is that lots of industries are revolving around the aquaculture, for example. So if you see, there are lots of ingredients coming into the aquaculture industry which have been invested based on the promise that your ingredients, which will be scaled up, will be bought by the aquaculture industry, right? So, and services and new technologies, and also UV light. I mean, what you are doing, for example. So these are the complementary small services industries which are also reliable on the they rely on the growth in the aquaculture sector. So everything is connected. We are all connected.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody's in it to hopefully see it succeed, and not just from an industry standpoint, but you know, we're going to need the industry to succeed in the future as, you know, wild fish, of course, become harder and harder to be able to catch and supply for sure. So I mean, it's only a matter of time. So I hate to wrap it up because I know we had a lot of other things that we were hoping to discuss, but I think hey, let's do it again soon. And
yeah, sure. Looking forward. I think if it goes well, why not?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, thanks, Sonny. And
Thank you,
we'll talk again
Brian.
soon.
Thank you.